Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. It's a lot drier here in Calgary than it is in Kingston, Jamaica. So good time to record the podcast. How are you doing?
Well, I'm pretty good. I noticed that as well. Like, we're recording on Friday evening, and I saw that torrential downpour going on there. That's quite something. So I guess the national team's game, it's tomorrow morning now?
Well, definitely delayed due to a monsoon or a cyclone or a hurricane going on in Jamaica. Yeah, you can't really play in that kind of conditions.
Yeah, it looked pretty crazy. So we don't have those conditions, but we had a kind of a nice enough day here. But hey, let's talk a little soccer. We're kind of getting near the end of the season, I think, here for most everybody. So if you are a new listener to our podcast, Scott, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
We discuss soccer in Calgary, and we talk about the sport at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the teams, and we often interview the players and coaches from the city's soccer community. We talk about teams and players from the grassroots and amateur leagues all the way up to the university and professional level.
In this episode, we're going to talk about two of the post-secondary teams in Calgary that were at Nationals, Mount Royal men's and the SAIT women's. We'll also talk about the Calgary connections to the NCAA tournament, and also talk about how some Calgary-based players are doing in Europe. Also discuss a little bit about Willie Acciao, and he's back playing again this weekend. We'll talk about who he's playing for and how that all is going to shake out.
Yeah, he's got a call up to the South Sudanese national team, which he has played for before, but it's exciting to see them call him up again for the international window. And yeah, lots of post-secondary soccer chat. Once again, we've been focusing on that a lot in recent weeks. The season is officially over for Canadian university and college soccer now. We just had national championship tournaments last week and two Calgary teams in action, like you mentioned. I think that's pretty rare. I was trying to think of the last year where there were two separate post-secondary teams from Calgary at respective national tournaments.
I would agree. I don't know exactly when that happened. It's not something that happens all the time. So let's dive into it. Unfortunately, there was no silverware brought home by either team, but let's talk about Mount Royal men's to start with. They were in Sydney, Nova Scotia for the USports men's tournament, and they were seeded first, as I believe Ryan Jackie mentioned on the previous episode. They started off with their first match against York on Thursday evening, and they won that one 1-0. Miguel de Rocha scored right at the end of the regular time in the 88th minute. Then after that, it went on to the semifinal match, which was against Cape Breton. They played that match and they lost 1-0. And the Cape Breton goal was scored by Owen Shepherd, who is not a Calgarian, but he did play for Foothills in League One Alberta this past summer. Then they got shuffled off to the bronze medal match, and they played their nemesis UBC. UBC extracted a little bit of revenge for losing the Canada West final, and they got the bronze medal. They won 1-0.
Yeah, and then in the other in the gold medal game, Cape Breton, who was the host team, they won the national championship. I believe they were playing University of Montreal, if I'm looking correctly. Yeah, and they have some Calgary connections too on Cape Breton. Obviously, Owen Shepherd, like you mentioned, with his connections to the League One Alberta last summer, and then Max Peepgrass, who was a former Cavalry USports draft pick. And Calgary did quite well in terms of individual performances. Caden Rogozinski from the Mount Royal Cougars was one of the tournament all-stars, as well as Marcus Kaiser, who plays for UBC. And then the two aforementioned, Max Peepgrass and Owen Shepherd. Yeah, I mean, from a Mount Royal perspective, it's tough when your semifinal opponent is the host team. But they actually, I read the game story, and Mount Royal did appear to have a really good handle on that game. They outshot Cape Breton 16-4. But the Capers managed to score in the 72nd minute. It was Owen Shepherd's third goal of the tournament. And yeah, they unfortunately suffered another 1-0 loss in the bronze against UBC. As you mentioned, it was a rematch of the Canada West final. So unfortunately for the Cougars, they were kept off the podium, but this was their very first time competing at Nationals. So to win a game, I think was a really good showing, and finishing fourth, that's nothing to sneeze at. And actually, I'd like to mention as well that the two MVPs of the bronze game were both Calgarians, Marcus Kaiser for UBC, and then the goalkeeper, Aiden Demoulin for MRU.
I think that there will be some level of disappointment that they didn't perform a little bit better in the Nationals. But I think when a little bit of time passes, I think everyone's going to agree this was a pretty great season overall for Mount Royal. And I don't think he can be too disappointed. I think they accomplished a lot of what they wanted to accomplish. And winning Canada West that's a pretty fantastic accomplishment. And they didn't exactly get blown out of Nationals either. So they had a pretty respectable showing. So job well done overall.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting and kind of humorous in the game recap. It mentioned that Cape Breton beating MRU was a big upset because MRU was ranked first heading into the national tournament. But yeah, like you said, overall a fantastic season for MRU. Winning their first ever Canada West Championship was a huge highlight, and then getting to compete at nationals was just great, really.
USports Women's National Tournament. It was in Kingston, hosted by Queens. There were no Calgary teams. The Dinos and the Cougars weren't involved. But I did want to sort of mention a couple things here. I guess the most notable thing is UBC did win the women's championship. They beat crosstown rivals Trinity Western 1-0. And there are 4 Calgarians on UBC: Rachel Morgan, Ashlyn Phillips, who I think is actually from Cochrane, Josie Claypool, and Sydney Slater. So definitely UBC, they're always a powerhouse. And
yeah. And is there also, sorry to put you on the spot, are there some Calgary players on Trinity Western as well? I feel like we may have mentioned that once or twice.
There are a couple. Olivia Kranjacek, I believe is her name. She's from Okotoks. And Holland Steele, also from Okotoks. So they're both with Trinity Western. So let's move on to the college championships and the SAIT women's program. They were out competing in PEI for the Nationals, and they played 3 matches. Their first match on Thursday, they played St. Foy, and they lost 4-0. Their second match, they played Douglas College. They also lost that one 2-1. And then their third match, they played University of Brandon, who plays at the college level for soccer. And they won that match 1-0. 1 win and 2 losses, and then they didn't proceed to the final day of the tournament. But that's kind of where they ended up. So a little disappointing to have a record of 1-2 in nationals, but still, I think that we don't know any of these teams, but there's some really strong teams in this tournament nationally. So, kudos for getting there.
Yeah, one of the teams, and actually they ended up winning the nationals, was Seneca College, the GTA, the Toronto area, and we know one player on that team who we've had on the podcast before is Shanice Alfred of Airdrie, and she talked about how a lot of her Guyanese national team mates are teammates of hers at Seneca. So pretty strong Seneca squad. But apart from that, I have to agree. I didn't know anything about Saint Foy or Douglas College, even which cities these teams are in. But yeah, they must have been pretty strong to overcome SAIT, given the season that SAIT had in Alberta.
At the national awards, there were a couple of players with Calgary connections that were named All-Canadians, and that was Megan Weeb from SAIT and Shanice Alfred from Seneca College, who we were just talking about a second ago. So both of them were named All-Canadians for the CCAA this year, and good for them. And on the men's side, there were a couple members of SAIT that were named All-Canadians, Sine Helly and John Ingram. And also men's coach of the year was SAIT's own Connor Brady.
Yeah, I mean, SAIT had such a dominant regular season. Something happened at the ACAC championship tournament, but up until then, their season had almost been perfect. So it's good to see that even though their season fizzled out in a disappointing manner, they were still recognized for how strong of a season they had.
Okay, let's go south of the border and talk about the NCAA Women's Championship Tournament. And the first round was completed last weekend, and the second round is underway right now this weekend as we're recording, and some of the second round matches have actually been completed already. So we always like to talk about Memphis. They're the number 6 seed, and they have a lot of Calgary content. And in their first round match, they played LSU, and they beat LSU 2-1. And Maya Jones from Calgary scored one of the goals. And then tonight, Friday evening, they played their second round matchup against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame was seeded 3rd, and they pulled off the victory. It was a win 3-2. So they're now essentially in the final 16 teams, and they're going to play 7th ranked Pittsburgh. So I believe Pittsburgh pulled off the upset and won their second round match. So Memphis is actually going into this next match as the higher seed. And I'm not exactly sure what day that match is, but I'm presuming it's later next week. So,
but I mean, that's so impressive that they were able to down Notre Dame. So the number 3 seed in all of NCAA.
Yeah, it is impressive. I don't understand these ratings though, because out of those 64 teams that are in the tournament, there's essentially 4 sets of seeds. And Memphis was 6 seeded in their group. So that means that there were 5 ahead of them in their own, but there was also in the other 3 brackets, there was also a bunch of teams rated higher than them. And at the end of the year, weren't they ranked number 8 or number 9 nationally? So I don't really understand the whole seeding process and how that works relative to the national rankings. But the impression I get is this is a huge win versus Notre Dame. So good for them. Great for them.
Yeah. And I think they probably have a legitimate chance now of contesting for the NCAA championship. I mean, aren't they on like a crazy win streak at the moment?
Oh, yeah. I'm not even sure what it is. Is it 17 or 18 wins in a row? And now they're going to face Pittsburgh. And I believe if they win this match, then that would put them into the Elite 8. And chances are that will run them into the number 1 seed on the that they would play. That's Florida State. And I think they've pretty much been ranked number 1 nationally for most of the year. So we'll continue to watch with interest.
Mm-hmm. And then I know you've also been following closely University of Maine, who are making their first NCAA tournament appearance.
Mm-hmm. And they played last weekend against number 4 Harvard, and they lost 3-0. From what I was reading on the social media and their website, they don't sound too disappointed. They sound very happy that they made the tournament. And I think that was mission accomplished. And Harvard was a fair bit better than them, I think, by most measures. So I don't think... if you're looking at it from a University of Maine point of view, I think they're pretty happy with how the season played out. But their tournament is done. And then the other person who has a Calgary connection in the tournament is Anderson Williams, and she's a senior playing for Texas A&M. They're the number 8 seed. Last weekend, they played Colorado, and they won 1-0. Today or this weekend, they played number 1 Florida State, and they lost 1-0. So they're out of the tournament. So that's it. We're basically at the point right now where, as far as I'm aware, the only teams with real specific Calgary connection left in the tournament right now is Memphis.
And we didn't mention this, but the Calgary connection for the University of Maine, that would be it's Rebecca Grisdale, Emma Schneider, and Victoria Dungy.
Mila Schneider too.
Okay, so four players on University of Maine from Calgary.
Yeah, and actually I think I've read something that there is another Calgarian who has been recruited to the University of Maine, but I don't actually have all the details on that, and I don't have a name. But I know in their recruiting class, they picked up at least one player from the Whitecaps who I believe is from Calgary. So I'll try and track down the details of that in time for our next episode. But I believe that the Calgary contingent next year at University of Maine could be 5. I thought it might be fun to do a bit of a recap and a run through of how Calgarians in Europe are doing right now. So maybe we'll just run them down one by one. Do you want to just alternate on this, Scott? We can just go back one at a time, and then we can chat a little bit about them. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good. This is kind of like our version of Canucks Abroad with a Calgary focus.
Yeah, kind of. By the way, those guys do a great job. Hats off to them. Let's start with Gota Natigne, because he's someone who has definitely been front of mind from a Calgary point of view. The big sale from Cavalry to second division club in France, Annecy. I did not check actually this most recent match, but up to this point, he hasn't really seen the pitch. If you remember when he was with Cavalry, he was nursing an injury. So my understanding of it is I think he's kind of got to the point where he's healthy enough to play. And I think he sat on the bench a few times, but I as far as I know, he has not hit the pitch as of yet.
I'm just checking now, and it doesn't look like he was playing in this most recent game, which was on November 11th against FC Bordeaux. That was a 3-1 loss. And FC NSC is in 15th place in Ligue 2 at the moment. Yeah, I don't see Natigny in either the starting 11 or on the subs bench. But like you mentioned, he has been injured. I would imagine, like, we know that the transfer fee from Calgary was in the realm of $500,000. I think that's what Oliver Platt reported. I don't know if that's a big transfer or not by Ligue 2 standards, but you'd assume that if they're going to spend that amount on him, they would have him in their plans, if not immediately in the medium term.
Like, I would think so. I can't profess to know too much about what they need. It seems to me that he would be the ideal guy that you could bring off the bench to really bring in some energy and make some stuff happen, say in the last 30 minutes of a match or something like that. So maybe that's what we're going to see from him in the short term. But
yeah, they've played 14 games. They've only scored 17 goals, so just over 1 per game. And we know Natigny can be an attacking threat. He's got a lot of pace. He dribbles at his defender. He makes things happen. They're in 15th in a 20-team league, so not in danger of relegation, but they're only 3 points above 18th. So that would, I believe, in League to be a relegation candidate. So yeah, they're going to want to pick up their performances, and hopefully Gauthier Natigny can have a bit of a role in that.
Mm-hmm.
So another player we know from Calgary who's playing over in Europe is another former Cavalry guy, Arabin Pepple. He was signed to Luton Town, who of course are in the Premier League now, but I believe he's with Bromley in National League, so 5th division. Yeah. Have you been keeping an eye on how he's doing there, or is he playing much?
He's played some, but I don't think he's actually opened his account with them yet, as far as I'm aware. I can't expect that goals are going to be expected from him. I know he has been on the pitch a bit, but I don't think he hasn't been much of an impact guy, at least at this point.
Now, I know it's Wikipedia, but his Wikipedia says he's played 6 games for Bromley so far. Not sure if he's been starting those or coming off the bench. It's quite surprised. He's still only 20 years old. Hey, he'll turn 21. Actually, his birthday is on Christmas Day, so just over a month from now, he'll turn 21. He'll be able to get a drink in the U.S. if he so chooses. Looks like Bromley's doing pretty decently. They're in 4th place after 19 matches with 10 wins, 6 draws, and 3 defeats. I don't know how many get promoted to League 2, but 4th place in 14 league. That's pretty decent.
You're showing you're not watching Welcome to Wrexham, because they went over that in great detail. So what happens in the National League is the winner of the league gets automatically promoted, and then there's a promotion playoff between teams 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then the winner of that playoff gets promoted. So there's only 2 teams go up. It's actually really hard to get out of the National League. I know that documentary, they comment, some of the officials from the team, and they said the National League is the hardest league to get promoted out of. It's even harder than some of the higher leagues, because in some of the higher leagues, 3, 4 teams get promoted, but here it's 2. So it's not super easy.
That's an interesting tidbit. And yeah, I still have to watch Welcome to Wrexham. I know you've been pushing that on me for a while, and I do want to get around to it at some point.
Okay, let's move on and talk about Victor Loturi, another former Cav who is Calgary roots and has played for the men's national team. He's been playing for Ross County in the Scottish Premier League, and he's really been playing pretty well. He's usually starting, and I know he scored his first goal of the season here a couple weeks back, I think it was. So he's having a pretty solid season for Ross County. So not a lot specific to report. I'm not actually too familiar with how the team has been doing, but certainly from an individual standpoint, he's a pretty regular presence on that team, and he's not exactly on the fringes or anything. He's, I think, part of the core.
It's pretty cool to be a regular player in the Scottish Premier League. I just pulled up the league table. Ross County is struggling this season. They're in 11th place, and there's only 12 teams in the Scottish Premier League, so they're second from bottom. They have a 2-4-6 record after 12 games. like you mentioned, Victor Loturi. I saw that goal on Twitter. It looks like he scored off his own rebound, and then in the interview after, he talked about how it took him a year to kind of open his account for Ross County. But he is more of like a box-to-box midfield player, central midfielder, rather than like a goal-scoring player. So he's not really on the pitch to score goals, but I think that's going to do a lot for his confidence to have scored his first goal. And another Calgary guy who's playing over in Europe right now is Scott Kennedy. He is with Wolfsberger SAIT in Austria, in the Austrian Bundesliga, and it looks like he's a regular starter.
Oh, yeah, I think he's been playing pretty consistent player there.
Yeah, and they're in 6th place, and the Austrian Bundesliga, like the Scottish Premier League, only has 12 teams in their top flight. Basically middle of the pack with a 5-5-4 record. We know that he just moved there from, where was he? He was in Germany, right? He was with Jan Regensburg.
And then they got relegated.
Yeah, from the 2nd division. So he was looking around for a new club, and he's back in Austria where he's played before. Seems quite comfortable there.
And now we're getting to one of our former podcast guests, Dominick Zator. He's playing in the Polish First Division. His team's in 13th place right now, and he is basically a regular starter. He usually plays the full 90. Yeah, he's in the core of that team at this point, and I think that when he started there, it's for Corona Kalisz, I believe is the name of the team.
Corona Kelce, I think.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Scott. He was brought in, and they were in the relegation zone, and I think this year they're a bit above that. I think they're kind of mid-pack. I think it's an 18-team first division. So they're a ways away from relegation, but they're not exactly looking at a championship this year by the looks of things.
All right. Yeah, according to his Wikipedia, he's got 31 games, league games for Corona Kelce. I don't think Wikipedia counts cup games or anything like that. But yeah, we knew that he was kind of the starting right back for Corona Kelce. I'm not sure if he's still playing at right back or if he's been back to his former position of center back, but I think that he's an important player for them. So it's great to see. We have another Calgarian playing in a European country's top flight. That used to be, I think just Sam Adekubi was the only one back in the day.
Yeah, because then you'd look back and there were some other players with Calgary connections, but someone like Kevin McKenna and a couple others. But yeah, for a while there wasn't. Yeah, Nick Ledgerwood, but for a while there was not too many. So I'll briefly mention one other player here, and then Scott, you can finish it off. But Dane Dominick, who has some Calgary connections, he's been with second division club in Croatia, and I'm sure I'll wreck it. It's NK Dugapoji, and he really hasn't played. He's on the roster, but he hasn't really played to any degree. So I don't know the details, but certainly he's a Calgarian who has earned himself a contract in Europe, but he's not exactly had much opportunity to hit the pitch at this point.
Right. I was thinking, where do I know that name from? And then I looked back, and he was with Cavalry, I believe, in 2019 preseason. He was either trying out the club or was one of the players. He never was named to the final roster, but that was how I was like, man, I feel like I know that name. Is he a former Dino? Like, where is he from? But anyway,
I'm pretty sure he is a former Dino.
And then the last player we kind of had on our Calgarians abroad list is Caniggia Elva, former Southwest United guy. He's playing regularly for Rot-Weiss Erfurt in Germany's 4th division. That is actually Graham Fisher's former club. Even though they're, I guess, only in the 4th division at the moment, I believe they're a pretty big club. I think they're the main club in that city, and they get decent crowds. So he's in the past, I know Caniggia Elva's been. He played previously for Würzburger Kickers as well as VfB Stuttgart's reserve team. And he's kind of floated, I think, between the 3rd and 4th divisions in Germany. But he also recently made his men's national team debut for St. Lucia in October. And I believe he scored as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know you were asking before if that cap ties into St. Lucia, and I believe it does.
Yeah, because I thought he'd been involved with Canada's setup for either U17 or U20 in the past. But I think I believe he's like an attacking midfielder, maybe a winger.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, Canada has a lot of talent in his position right now. So maybe he just hasn't been playing at a high enough level in today's Canadian landscape to really be considered a viable option for the men's national team. I mean, if you're competing for playing time with Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David, then you have tough sledding ahead of you. But maybe he also, has a lot of St. Lucian pride and always wanted to play for that country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of agree. I think he seems like the kind of player who, if it would have been a decade earlier, he would have seemed to be a lock to play for Canada. But with where they're at with their current depth, I think it was a bit of a stretch to think he would figure prominently. And his family does have a lot of St. Lucia connections. Both his father and his uncle played for the St. Lucia national team. So he's there's definitely some history there from that standpoint. So.
And another player with Calgary connections who's recently been called up to a national team is Willie Akio, cavalry player called up to play once again for South Sudan, who have some World Cup qualifiers this weekend.
I think playing these World Cup qualifiers would be pretty interesting. Senegal, a powerhouse on the African scene. So, yeah, it's going to be a pretty cool experience, I'm sure, for him.
Yeah, I don't know if Sadio Mane is going to play or Kalidou Koulibaly, but yeah, Senegal is often one of the African teams that qualifies for the World Cup, and they always seem to have a player or two who's featuring for one of Europe's biggest clubs or in one of Europe's biggest leagues. So if Akio plays in tomorrow's game, that will be an awesome experience for him.
I think we'll wrap up for this week's episode. Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at YYC Soccer for more information about how to subscribe or leave a question or comment. And you can follow us on Twitter at YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.